Durban has known violence. It's seen gangs, political hits, and brutal turf wars, but nothing quite like the silent reign of terror brought by one man, Sbonelo Madanon Shangase. He wasn't just feared, he was a myth. Madanon wasn't the kind of you saw coming. He was the kind you only heard about. After the stopped, he is accused of ending at least 15 lives. And for the longest time, all the police had were whispers. They hunted shadows, but came up empty. And as for Madanon, he just kept. But even the deadliest phantoms make mistakes. And when Shangase slipped, just once, it all came crashing down. This is how Durban's most feared hitman met his end, and how one of the city's darkest chapters was finally closed. The story of how Shangase met his end can't be told without first asking the question that haunted investigators and terrified communities. How does a man become a How does someone become a ghost with a single mission to end lives? The answer doesn't lie in one defining moment, but in the silence of a past barely recorded. Official records on Shangase's early life are scarce. There are no photos from school prize givings, no classmates remembering his laugh. He simply appears, fully formed, like a shadow stepping into the light. That absence makes him even more unsettling. It's as if he never had a beginning, only an end waiting to happen. To understand him, you need to understand the world that shaped him. In Durban's townships, especially places like Inanda, life is hard. These aren't the beachfront postcards tourists see. They're dense, chaotic neighborhoods of tin roof homes packed close together, where survival is a daily struggle. And power in these places often comes from crime. The underworld offers a way out, but it demands everything in return. It teaches you its rules quickly. Start small. Prove you won't crack. Silence your guilt. Violence becomes your language, your tool. To rise in this world, you need more than muscle. You need to feel nothing. No hesitation. No mercy. This is likely where Shangase was shaped. Somewhere along that road, he stopped being just another face in the crowd. He embraced violence and never looked back. That's when the name Madanon was born. While the meaning of Madanon is still debated in whispers, the message was clear. If someone hired Madanon, the job would be done, clean, fast, without remorse. The boy with no recorded past had become Durban's most feared hitman. He was no longer Sbonelo Shangase, he was Madanon, and his reign of terror was just beginning. And his wave of terror began in the winter of 2021. This was the first drop of the terror that would eventually flood the streets. On the 7th of August, everything changed for the family of Patrick Nalanlagoga. One moment, he was just going about his day, a familiar presence in his community. The next, he was gone, and in what felt like an instant. The attack was quick, precise, and cold. For the people who knew him, it was a devastating loss. But for Sbonelo Madanon Shangase, it was just another job. He didn't linger. He arrived, took a life, and disappeared like smoke. Less than a month later, on the 2nd of September, the violence escalated. This time, two men, Njabulo Bongani Shongwe and Zolani Goodman Mbuthuma, were killed together in Inanda. It wasn't random. It was controlled, calculated, and ruthless. Taking out two people at once sent a clear message. No one was untouchable, and no amount of company could guarantee safety. The community, already shaken, began to shift from fear to full-blown paranoia. People started watching their backs, wondering who would be next. Later that same month, the terror reached a new level. Madanon was now allegedly behind a kidnapping. The victim, Pakamani Kwele, was taken from Inanda. Unlike the fast executions of before, this was slower and more disturbing. Kidnapping wasn't just an act of violence, it was psychological warfare. The fear stretched beyond the victim to torment their family, who could only imagine what was happening in the shadows. When Kwele was eventually murdered, it became clear Madanon was more than a killer. He was a man who played with power, who relished control over who lived and who didn't. But it wasn't just killings. Around the same time, he allegedly pulled off an armed robbery that netted 140,000 rands, which is about $7,500 US. It wasn't a desperate act, it was strategic. Madanon was building something darker than a reputation. He was running an operation, one built on intimidation, money, and blood. What started as scattered drops of violence was fast becoming a storm. Still, even after all this, most of the chaos remained in the shadows. That changed in June 2021. This time, it wasn't in a back alley or on the outskirts of the city. It was in the heart of Durban, in the redeveloped Point area, a place where people lived, worked, and believed they were safe. That illusion shattered the day Brendan Thandrien and his family were ambushed. Brendan was with his brother Craig, his teenage daughter Bianca, and Craig's young son. They weren't doing anything unusual. They were simply spending time together. Then came the HITMAN. The attack was brutal and public. Brendan and Craig were down with no hesitation. And then, in a moment so cruel it defied belief, they turned the on Bianca. A young girl with her entire future ahead of her was executed alongside her father and uncle. Just like that, 3 lives were erased. Only Craig's little boy survived. He saw everything. He saw his father fall. He saw his cousin. He saw strangers end his world in a matter of seconds. The trauma of that day would never leave him. This wasn't like Madanon's previous hits. This was a massacre, done in plain sight, as if daring the city to stop him. And it worked. The fear wasn't just in Inanda anymore. It spread across Durban. People weren't just afraid. They felt hunted. The bloodshed that had slowly spread through the streets of Inanda was about to reach its most horrifying point. By January 2022, what began as targeted had grown into something far more chaotic and terrifying. The violence was no longer quiet or calculated. It erupted into something that would be remembered as a massacre, an act so brutal that it shook the entire community to its core. It happened in Amayoti, a part of Inanda already scarred by violence. That day, a group of young men were gathered together, unaware that their time was running out. A car arrived, and out stepped a group of men heavily armed and prepared for slaughter. Among them, witnesses claim, was Madanon. The attack came without warning. No words were exchanged, no threats issued. Just the sudden roar of fire. The moved through the group, executing each person with precision, as if they were carrying out a routine task. When it was over, 6 bodies lay lifeless. These weren't high-profile targets or rival criminals. They were ordinary young men from the neighborhood. Their names were Wandile Fanafi, Kafelani Makovu, Malondi Gitane, Malondi Kunini, Lindos Fambo, and Philip Hinsa. 2 of them were barely adults. Wandile and Kafelani were still in school, preparing for their final exams. They had dreams of building something better, but those dreams ended on the pavement that day. This wasn't just a violent hit. It was a message, a demonstration that anyone, no matter their background or ambitions, could be without cause. The community was left stunned. What had once seemed like calculated criminal activity now felt like a storm of violence, tearing through anyone in its path. The massacre showed that Madanon's alleged violence was no longer limited to the criminal world. It had grown into something more terrifying, random, merciless, and unstoppable. As the people of Inanda tried to come to terms with the horror, the violence began spreading beyond the township. It reached the quieter, more affluent suburb of Overport, where families lived behind gates, hoping the chaos wouldn't touch them. But even here, the shadow followed, and with it came a mistake so devastating it exposed the cold mechanics of a hitman's world. The target was a businessman named Zain Moideen. Someone wanted him gone, and reportedly, the contract was handed to Madanon's network. But in their first attempt, they got it wrong. Instead of Moideen, the killers gunned down his neighbor, Shahid Mudel. He wasn't a man involved in shady dealings. He had no enemies. He was simply living in the wrong place, next to the wrong person. It didn't end there. The gunmen didn't disappear or abandon the mission after their mistake. They waited. A few weeks later, they returned to the same street, and this time, they found the man they were really after. Moideen was dead on Brickfield Road. The fact that someone could be just for looking like another person, or for being in the wrong house, highlighted something deeply disturbing. These weren't crimes of passion. They were jobs. Mistakes weren't mourned, they were corrected. That level of detachment, where human lives were treated like checkboxes on a to-do list, revealed how little value these placed on life. By this point, it was clear Madanon was no longer just a figure whispered about in the townships. His alleged crimes had grown into a wave of violence that swept across communities, leaving bodies, fear, and grief in its path. A man who students and destroys families has already shown that human life means nothing to him. But in May 2022, Sbonelo Madanon Shangase allegedly went even further. He turned his violence toward the one force meant to stop him, the police. This wasn't just another crime. It was a bold, open challenge to the state. By going after law enforcement, Madanon made the fight personal. This wasn't just about justice anymore. It was about taking him down. The confrontation happened in Cato Manor. A police patrol was making its rounds, experienced officers behind the wheel. They spotted a suspicious vehicle without license plates, a red flag in any high crime area. As they pulled up to investigate and asked the occupants to roll down a window, they expected tension, maybe resistance. What they didn't expect was fire. Without hesitation, the men inside the car opened fire. According to reports, Madanon was one of them. A routine stop turned into a chaotic shootout. Bullets flew in both directions. 2 officers managed to avoid being hit, but the third took a shot to the chest. The bullet pierced his lung, and he was rushed to intensive care, clinging to life. Later, the attacker's vehicle was found abandoned in Newlands East, riddled with bullet holes. But this wasn't just a fight gone wrong. It was a message, a violent, calculated warning to the police. It told them Madanon wasn't afraid, but this time he had gone too far. Attacking law enforcement crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Suddenly, the hunt for Madanon wasn't just about bringing a to justice. It became personal for every officer in the province. He wasn't just a name whispered in fear. He was now South Africa's most wanted man, and the clock was ticking. When a criminal attacks the police, everything changes. The attempted murder of 3 officers lit a fire beneath the investigations. Madanon had dared to strike at the very heart of law and order, and in doing so, he forced the system to strike back. The search for him intensified overnight. No more delays, no more shadows. It was now a full-force pursuit. Elite units within the South African Police Service were mobilized with one goal: bring him in. Detectives revisited old cases, searched through forensic reports, and spoke again to witnesses who were once too scared to talk. One chilling pattern began to take shape. The same kind of high-powered rifle kept showing up at different scenes. Things looked unrelated at first glance, but they weren't. The same cold precision, the same brutal efficiency. All roads were now pointing to one man. As investigators closed in, they began to understand how he moved, how he worked, and how he stayed one step ahead. But now, Madanon was no longer calm. He was paranoid. He felt the pressure. The streets that once offered him cover were turning against him. The police were coming, and he knew it. He had pushed too far, stayed in the game too long. The walls were closing in. What began as a slow, quiet investigation had turned into a manhunt. And for the first time, Madanon was running out of places to hide. The end of Sbonelo Madanon Shangase's reign didn't come with flashing sirens or a violent standoff. It ended quietly, on a long-distance bus, packed with everyday people who had no idea they were riding alongside one of the most feared men in KwaZulu-Natal. After leaving a trail of blood and fear behind him, his final moment as a free man was surprisingly uneventful. No fight, no chase, just calm, calculated police work that paid off after months of pressure and patience. By 2022, Madanon could feel the net closing in. He knew the police were coming, and the walls around him were getting tighter. Desperate to avoid capture, he decided to vanish. His escape plan was simple: leave KwaZulu-Natal behind and melt into the Western Cape's sprawling cities. Maybe he thought he could rebuild a new life in the shadows, or maybe another contract awaited him. Either way, he boarded an overnight bus, blending in with the other passengers, hoping no one would notice the man carrying a deadly past. But the police had already figured it out. An informant had tipped them off with exact details of his journey. Instead of risking a chaotic arrest at the station, they set a careful trap. They allowed the bus to travel a safe distance before intercepting it at a strategic point, the Marianne Hill Toll Plaza, a place where the road narrowed and options ran out. As the bus slowed near the booths, officers moved in. There were no sirens, no shouting. The operation was clean. Police boarded the vehicle, scanning the faces of tired passengers. And there he was. The man who had once slipped through every dragnet was now just another traveler staring out a window. He didn't fight, he didn't run, he didn't even speak. He was done. Outside, officers checked his luggage. Inside, they found exactly what they feared: a high-powered rifle, and 90 rounds of ammunition. The tools of a killer, hidden beneath a bus ticket and a quiet demeanor. The arrest didn't just end a manhunt. It brought closure to countless victims who had long lived in fear. At that toll plaza, under the harsh artificial lights, the reign of Durban's most dangerous hitman finally ended. He wasn't down in a blaze of glory. He was escorted off a bus and charged to court. Once the most feared name in Durban's criminal underworld, Madanon now sat in court under fluorescent lights, stripped of power and reputation. The indictment was not just a legal formality. It was a detailed record of everything he was believed to have done, a document that laid bare the scale of his violence. Standing beside his alleged accomplice, Thalente Mkhize, he listened as prosecutors read out the charges. There were 28 in total, each one a mark against his legacy. This wasn't a minor criminal being brought in for questioning. This was someone accused of carrying out a campaign of terror. Among the charges were 15 counts. Each victim's name was read out, echoing through the courtroom like ghosts demanding justice. Patrick Goja, Njabolo Shongwe, Zolani Mbuthuma. Then came the names that shook the province. Brendan Thandroyan, his brother Craig, and Bianca, the teenage daughter who never saw adulthood. An entire family wiped out in one brutal attack. The court heard about Zain Moideen, a businessman, and Shahid Mudel, an innocent man who happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. And then there was the Ananda massacre, 6 lives gone in a matter of seconds, including 2 high school students whose futures were stolen before they even began. The indictment didn't stop there. The attempted murder of 3 police sergeants in Cato Manor was outlined in full, an act that had turned the case into a war against the state itself. There were kidnapping charges tied to the abduction of Fakamani Kwele, robbery, fire possession, ammunition charges, and finally, the rifle found during that quiet bus arrest. Now, the smoking connected him to it all. The ghost had been captured, his crimes had been named, and now, in the cold, procedural world of the courtroom, he would face the consequences. The capture of Sbonelo, Madanon, Shangase, marked a clean end to his terror on the streets, but justice wouldn't come as swiftly as his crimes. His world had been built on violence and fear, where lives ended in seconds. Now, he faced something unfamiliar: time. The slow, methodical pace of South Africa's legal system was a punishment in itself. The very system he once defied was now his only reality, and it moved with agonizing slowness. His case was shifted to the Durban High Court. It didn't begin with dramatic revelations or fiery exchanges, but with quiet paperwork and delays. Hearings were scheduled and rescheduled. The focus wasn't on guilt or innocence, but on logistics, legal representation, court dates, and procedural disputes. Shangase and his co-accused, Thalente Mkhize, struggled to secure and pay for their lawyer. At one point, Mkhize dismissed his attorney in court, forcing another delay as he applied for state-funded legal aid. Each postponement tested the patience of the grieving families. They came to every hearing, sat just meters away from the men accused of shattering their lives, and watched as the case slowed to a crawl. The state revealed it had over 100 witnesses prepared to testify. That number alone painted a picture of the case's size. The defense refused to admit even the most basic facts, meaning the prosecution would have to prove every detail from scratch. It was a clear strategy, not to beat the charges, but to stretch them out. While Madanon's victims had no time, no warning, he would now fight for his life minute by minute, through procedural technicalities and delays. But as the legal gears turned, one question loomed larger than the rest. Who was paying for the Madanon may have been the triggerman, but someone else was giving the orders. Someone with money, motive, and the ability to stay hidden. That unanswered question haunted the victims' families and echoed through every court corridor. For a brief moment, it looked like they might get an answer. After businessman Zain Moideen was police arrested Risan Perumal, who allegedly admitted to paying for the hit. There was even talk of a recording where he confessed. Suddenly, there was a name behind the contract, a face for the grief, but the charges didn't stick. The National Prosecuting Authority dropped the case, citing a lack of evidence strong enough to ensure a conviction. Just like that, Perumal walked free. The decision crushed the families. While the alleged sat in prison, the man believed to have ordered it all vanished from the courtroom and returned to life on the outside. It revealed a deeper truth about organized crime. Catching the man who pulls the trigger is one thing, Catching the one who pays for it, the one who never gets his hands dirty, is far harder. As 2024 slipped into 2025, the case continued to drag. What began with sirens and headlines faded into paperwork and waiting. The trial still hasn't started in full. Shangase's world has shrunk to prison walls and courtroom benches. For the families, life is now a long wait for closure that always feels just out of reach. Madanon once delivered without delay. Now, he sits through delay after delay, unable to escape or fight back. The power he once had is gone. Each court appearance chips away at the myth that surrounded him. He's not a ghost anymore. He's a man caught in a system he can't outrun, slowly being unmade by the very justice he never gave his victims. The end hasn't come with one final blow. It's coming slowly, piece by piece, in silence. And for everyone who lost someone to his violence, the silence is deafening. The ghost has been brought into the light, and while the final verdict is yet to be written, one thing is certain. The hitman's reign is over, and one of Durban's darkest chapters has finally, mercifully, been closed.